Thank you. I'm the one that's privileged. As an entrepreneur, I end up working very quietly, alone. I don't have an office. I work from my sitting room. So it's actually great to be here amongst people that are interested in hearing my stories, because I can tell you my dog, my cat, and my children are sick of them all. So I'll give you a little bit about me and how I got to be standing here. And then, because I know that you want to hear about marketing, I'll try and focus more on marketing and things that I can tell you about brands that I've successfully marketed. But as you heard, I started life as an entrepreneur in a very, very young age. When I was 10, I had chickens in my back garden, and I sold those chickens' eggs to my neighbours. When I was 13, I started a babysitting circle. My neighbour asked me to babysit their children. It was 50 cents an hour, and that was great, but I could only babysit one lot of children at a time. So it didn't take me long to realise that what I really needed to do was get other girls from my school babysitting children too. So we put the rate up to 60 cents an hour, and I took 10 cents an hour. So before long, I had my first contracting company, which 30 years later, I've still got a contracting company. We just charge bigger margins. So it's about, from the time I was tiny, always having this burning thing in me that I wanted to succeed, wanted to prove that I could sell things. People say to me, "Oh, you've just done it for the money." And I have to tell you, I've never done it for the money. The money is the scorecard on which everybody's judged. I mean, everybody goes rushing out to get MBR and go, "Oh my God, where am I?" Not because you want to count your millions, but because you know that that's a scorecard. Am I doing as well as Joe down the road? Am I doing better? By the way, MBR makes it all up. But it's that kind of thing. It's that what drives you. It's not the money, it's the game you play. So, each great business that I grow and sell, that to me is like winning a gold medal at the Olympics. I'm not a sports person, don't look like one, wasn't designed to be one, but what I am is a passionate business person. And so, as I told you, started young, but by the time I was 18, I had left school. I was adopted into a very poor family that didn't believe in education for girls. So when I was 15, my parents made me leave school. By the time I was 18, I was married. By the time I was 20, I had 2 children. By the time I was 22, I was divorced with 2 children. So it was pretty tough. We're going back, my children are in their late 30s now, so we're going back a long time. No DPB. And what do? Well, I did what I've always done, and that was I sold myself out of trouble. So first of all, I sold myself as a typist, and I worked for an ENT practice, and I used to type medical notes. And I learned to understand kind of great medical words like otorhinolaryngological, etc., etc. And I could type it really fast. But, that was never going to make me very much money because, all I could do then was sell time. And one of the great learnings for me in life is one of the biggest mistakes people make is selling time. If you're an accountant, a lawyer, a doctor, all you've got is that hour or those 2 hours that you're engaged with the patient or the client. That's all you can sell. But if you're a business person, you can sell your product, you can sell the business. So just think how many times that multiplies. So everybody always says to me, "What advice can you give to young people starting out?" And I go, whatever you do, don't be an accountant, a lawyer, or a doctor. Bad mistake. Be a business person and think about how you can grow the product in the market and then sell the business, because that's kind of what I do. Anyway, so we go back to solo mum, 2 kids, no money, working as a typist, never going to be successful. So I decided I was going to go and sell real estate. And I did an okay job as a real estate agent. And then one day, this is very complicated, bear with me, I went back to the practice where I had been a typist. And in that waiting room was a patient that I'd particularly liked. His name was Bill Foreman, and he and his wife had been very regular patients. I hadn't been in those doctors' rooms for a couple of years. The reason I was there was the surgeon that I had worked for had bought a property, and I was there to get his signature. So I wander into this room, I'm a lot more successful than when I was as typist. I've got the contract in one hand, I've got the pen in the other, and there was this patient. So it was great. It's just amazing to see you. Haven't seen you for 2 years. How are you? He said, "I'm not great." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Oh, well, my wife died yesterday." So it was a bit of a devastating moment, and we talked about that, and I was really fond of his wife, and it was a really sad story. So that we hugged and commiserated and life moved on. A few months later, I received a call from his PA. Now let me tell you, when you're a real estate agent typist, you don't get many calls from PAs, especially one that says, "Good afternoon. Mr. Foreman would be very grateful if you would join him in his boardroom for lunch on Friday." And I remember getting off the phone and ringing a girlfriend and saying, "Oh my God, I've been invited to a boardroom. He wants to have lunch with me. What am I going to do?" And she said, "Well, it's obvious. He's just been widowed. He's got small children. He's going to offer you the job as a nanny." But great. So I went along to the boardroom, totally intimidated. And, this is the 80s, and I don't know what boardrooms are like today because I try and avoid them. But in the 80s, it was mahogany panelled with McCanns on the wall and binnies, and there was this huge board table, and he was at one end and I was seated at the other. I was terrified, and I was sitting there holding on to my CV thinking, "Oh my God, what's he going to ask me?" Anyway, we had a lovely conversation, and he talked to me about his children. And so I started telling him about all my great skills, cooking, which I'm not great at, and I really like cleaning houses, and because all I could think was, what an opportunity to go from selling real estate to working for this incredible man. What I haven't told you is that Bill was running one of the biggest private companies in the country at the time. It was a business called Trigon, and he had taken that business, which was plastic packaging, from a tin shed in Hamilton, employing 5 people, to New Zealand's first private global manufacturing company. So at the point I met him, he had 2 factories in the States, 2 factories in England, factories in New Zealand, 2 in New Zealand actually, sales offices through Europe and sales offices through Asia. Now just pause for a moment and imagine how tough that was for him. Early 80s, no cell phones, no email. All the things that we as business people take for granted, he didn't have. So I feel incredibly proud that he had achieved so much by about 1985 when I met him, because he had this global empire. And the way he did it, the really old-fashioned way, damn hard work. So he would work all day doing what company chairmen and CEOs do, and then he'd work all night. And he used to say, the great thing about being an international company based in New Zealand is you can be in London for lunch the next day. And if you think about it, he was right. And he spent his entire life in seat 1A. And seat 1A was his home. And he would go from New Zealand to London to Seattle to Atlanta back to New Zealand. Quite a hard thing to do when you're recently widowed with small children. So I thought, good. He told me all of this over lunch. And I thought, good, cool, great, he needs a nanny. But anyway, he didn't offer me the job as a nanny. A few weeks later, he rang and asked me out to lunch again. Still didn't offer me a job as a nanny. And then he said to me, "I'm going sailing in the Caribbean, and I'll give you a call when I get back, and perhaps we can have lunch again." So I'm on the phone to my girlfriend going, "Gosh, this is the longest job interview I've ever had, and now he's going away. Do you think he still wants me?" And she said, "Well, probably not, but, see what happens." Well, while he was away, again, before we had wonderful spark and all those things, I received a snail mail from him. "Dear Diane, I really enjoyed our lunches, and I was wondering if you would like to take it further. I know I'm a lot older than you, but if you would, enclosed are tickets to Hawaii. Please meet me at the meeting place at Honolulu Airport on the 14th of June. If you don't turn up, I'll never bother you again. But if you do, let's see if we've got some magic." And I'm going, that doesn't look like a nanny job. And so back on the phone to my girlfriend, "But I haven't got the clothes." And my girlfriend said, "Don't worry about the clothes, just get on the plane." And so I thought, and this is a great thing that I say about business, think about the worst thing that can happen, never the best. Because everybody tends to want to think about the very best thing that can happen. "Oh, I'll invest $100 and I'll make $1 million. Or, but it's not about that. Because we can all dream about the best thing. The question you should always ask yourself is, what's the worst thing that can happen? Because if you can live with the worst thing, then you should do it. And this is what my girlfriend said. She said, "What's the worst thing that can happen? He's not going to be a rapist. He's not going to be a murderer. He's got a pretty high public profile. The worst thing that can happen is you're going to have a bad time. And hey, if worst comes to worst, I'll lend you $800 and you can get a plane home. And by the way, I'll look after your kids." Well, who wouldn't have done it? So I went to Hawaii, and the rest, as they say, is history. Bill and I ended up marrying. We had 2 more children together, and he took me into his business. taking me into his business was really tough because no, he didn't want a nanny. What he wanted was a wife, and he thought what he was getting with me was going to be the ultimate corporate hostess, as he told me. He wanted me to be able to whip up a 4-course dinner for his clients. He wanted me to be able to plait the girl's hair while I was doing it, walk the dog, and by the way, darling, could you put some fuchsias in the garden? That's what he wanted. What he didn't realise was how much I loved business and how passionate I was, and that probably his attraction to me was we could talk business night and day. And I'm very famously quoted in a magazine in the States where I said, EY, why can't we get a tax deduction for our bath? Because Bill and I used to get into the bath every night, having put all our children to bed, to talk business. We were so passionate that the bathroom was our boardroom. That was where we would swap ideas. What do you think about marketing that to that country? Or how do you think we should take on Iceland? And so we had a life centred around a bath. But any of you that have got children probably realise that you need a bathroom to hide in, because where else do you get any privacy? And certainly with 6 children between us, there wasn't a lot of that going on. So our bath was our boardroom. And so he knew that I was passionate about business, but the problem was his other directors didn't. They all wrote me off as, oh my God, she's the third wife. She's not very bright. She was a typist. Well, we thought she was going to be the nanny. Now you're telling us that she's interested in the business? Well, Bill had fought a fight with these people, and they constantly said, keep her away from the business. She's just a girl. And our board was a very sophisticated board. We had a knight of the realm, we had a very senior banker, we had lawyers and accountants. But Bill had something very magical, which was he owned the majority of the company. And so, very important, never, ever, ever give away the majority ownership, because if you do, you can't get your own way. And he needed his own way because he had a very bad stroke. And he decided that I needed to be on the board, part of running the company, because he was sure he was going to die. And he said, you need to understand our business so that if I die, or when I die, you can take control. And he said, you're not going to understand that from the kitchen. You have to come to the boardroom. His directors didn't want me. In fact, they did everything they could to stop me becoming a director. But under his shareholding agreement, he had bought his shares in the name of the trust, and his trust had the ability to nominate one director. So I was nominated. So there was nothing the other directors could do. But they were so anti-me, despite the fact that they'd all been to these wonderful catered dinners that I learnt to cook, and they'd all been to my home, and they'd been to our wedding, that on the day that he appointed me to the Trigon board, I arrived and I said to him in the car on the way to the board meeting, what do I do? And he said, well, it's easy. You just get in there, you walk into the room, you shake hands with each one, and he said, then you sit down. Don't say anything for 3 months. Make a list of any questions you've got. Ask me afterwards. But again, another piece of learning, really good in a new situation, don't open your mouth too soon. Absorb everything you can. Find somebody you believe in, and you can ask them the questions. But don't be the first person to run in there saying, I know, I think, because you don't. You need to understand a business or a situation before you comment on it. So he gave me all this great advice. I went in and I went to shake each hand, and each man refused to shake mine. It's a pretty ghastly experience, to be honest. So there you stand, nervous, unqualified, in a room full of Auckland and New Zealand's greatest business people, being completely shunned. So I took a seat. Bill was very gracious, but he did say to them, gentlemen, I'm really disappointed at the welcome you've given my wife. It was a great shuffling of papers. But, that gives you an idea of the environment that I went into in about 1987. Loved only by my husband, unloved by his board, underrated by everybody. So what was the worst thing that could happen? They weren't expecting much from me. So the worst thing that could happen was that I would screw up. Fortunately, I didn't. And so I became a director. I kept my mouth shut. I learnt everything I could about the business. And a couple of years passed and Bill became more ill. So at that point, he appointed me CEO. You think it was awful being appointed to the board? Imagine what business in Auckland thought when Bill Foreman appointed his blonde bimbo third wife CEO of his multinational. Not a good look. So I had to prove it again. So then I had to prove to the staff. At that point, we had 1,000 staff. I had to prove to 1,000 people all over the world that I could do the job. And yeah, I had days that I hated it. And I had days that I almost wanted to crawl under the desk with fear, thinking, I can't do this. But in the end, I stuck with it. I was incredibly fortunate to have Bill as my mentor. I had the bath, so I had unrestricted access to one of New Zealand's best entrepreneurs. And over time, I learned about business, I learned about marketing, and I learned how to run people. So that's my background. That's how I came to be in business. I came because one man believed in me. He might have wanted a nanny, but he ended up with the CEO. And he said to me, Trigon is yours. Do with it what you will. Because what's the worst thing that can happen? We'll go broke. He said, I had no money when I started. You had no money when you started. We're not going to be any worse off. So I'm giving it to you. You grow this business. Well, I grew it. And please don't leave this room saying that I was flippant about it, because I'm not. It's hard work. It was a daily, nightly slog. And you try doing it with 6 children and an ill husband. It wasn't the easiest stack of cards that anyone could be dealt, but we'd got there. And one day I got a phone call from a man that said, my name is Dermot Dumphy, I own Sealed Air. Now, I'm not sure if any of you know Sealed Air, but it's the company that makes bubble film. And Dermot Dumphy was the owner of that company and CEO. He said, I've seen one of your factories in Atlanta and I want to own your business. I went, right. I said, well, I'm not really wanting to sell. And he said, well, that doesn't matter because I'm going to do something. I'm going to make you the Godfather offer. I said, well, what's the Godfather offer? He said, one you never say no to. So we agreed that I'd meet him in Atlanta the next week, and within 60 days he owned Trigon and we didn't. It was an amazing transaction. He was honest, he was straight. Bill had always had a number in his head, and he said, if someone pays me this number, we're gone. And he paid the number, so we went. And it's a kind of sad day when you sell a business like that, because the people have become your family, apart from the directors who probably still don't like me. But the people, we'd been to the funerals, we'd been to the weddings, we'd watched our people grow, we'd had this kind of internationalised life because of what Trigon was. And all of a sudden, we were kicked to the curb and we were just nobodies again. So Bill said to me, okay, we've had Trigon, it was fun, but everyone keeps saying you're only good at it because I gave you Trigon. So I'm going to give you something again. Here are the entire proceeds of Trigon, because we've got nothing to lose. You take them and you grow your own business, but I don't want to be part of it. I'm sick, I'm old, I'm going to be in your cheer squad, but I don't want to be a part of it. You build a business for you. So that's how I came to start the Emerald Group. And the Emerald Group has done some great things, and it's done some not so great things, because, the thing about business, it's like conducting an orchestra. You go, da-da-da-da-da-da, what's going on there and what's going on there. And when you're not conducting, you're juggling. You've got this ball in the air and you're catching that one and you might drop that one, because that's what business is all about. So Emerald has invested in some really different businesses. I was an original investor in the Mercy Ascot Hospitals along with Stephen Tyndall and David Levine. Wonderful business, wonderful people, grew a fantastic brand, which is what I'm going to talk about in a moment. I also have invested in retirement villages. We had a chain of furniture stores through the US, furniture manufacturing in the US, still have a hotel here in New Zealand. But then I decided that to populate these businesses, I needed the best people. And how do you get the first look at the best people? Well, you own a recruitment company. So I decided that I would start Emergent so that I got to populate my businesses with the best people, because I would see them first. So we started Emergent, which we still own today. And even though it's a hugely successful recruitment company, what it really is for me is still the first eyes on the best people. Because any business that you want to be successful in, it's about the people. It's not about the idea, it's not about the product. A really crappy product can make you a lot of money if you've got the best people doing it, selling it and marketing it. So I was really fortunate to own a recruitment company and get my first eyes on the first people. So we then had the recruitment company and the hotel and the American furniture business, the hospitals. It was a pretty diverse portfolio of businesses, but they were mine. And if I make a mistake, I can look in the mirror and go, the only person that's going to suffer is you. If I get it wrong, I'm not gambling anybody else's money. And just an aside, a couple of weeks ago, I was at a conference, and one of the other speakers was a banker. And they said, oh, what was the worst day in your life? And each of us on a panel had to say. And this banker said, oh, once I lost $20 million on a deal. And the adjudicator said, how'd you feel about that? He said, oh, well, it would have been worse if it was my money. Just imagine how you would have felt if you were the customer whose $20 million he lost. And to me, that sums up the difference between entrepreneurs and employees. He was a bank employee. He said it was a bad day to lose 20 million. Me as an entrepreneur, if I lost 20 million, it would be the worst day. And that's the difference, because it's your money. You're gambling with your money. You're gambling with your reputation. But the big thing that you're gambling with, and that's your brand. And that kind of brings me, how am I going for time?
You're going well.
Okay, so that kind of brings me to talk about branding and marketing. Because I think that what's made my businesses successful, apart from the people, because people is the most important thing, but the second most important thing is brand. Love your brand. Create a brand. It's not about a business, it's a brand. You've got to have, or you've got to organise brands for your clients that they are so proud of, they'll wear them stamped on their back. And I like to tell a story of Stephen Tyndall. Just before he floated the warehouse, I was at a black tie dinner with Stephen. And we've all been to the black tie dinners here. We know what they're like, long frocks for the women, men in the black tie and the suit. Stephen Tyndall turned up, beautiful black pants, but a red shed t-shirt, because he was really proud of his brand. And he wanted everybody in that room to know that he was floating the red sheds and he was proud. And I think that's a great indication of when you've got a brand, are you proud enough that you can wear it on your back? And so for me, having had all these experiences and growing these businesses, I decided I had to have a brand that I was proud of, and I wanted to grow it internationally. Because yes, you can have a recruitment company, you can have a hotel and all the things I had, but I didn't have what I had in Trigon. And that was the ability to walk down a street in London or Soho or anywhere and see a Trigon product. So I wanted to have a brand that I could walk down the street anywhere in the world and see it. And I thought, ice cream, something that everybody eats every day. Doesn't matter where you are in the world, you're going to eat ice cream. It wasn't quite that simple, and I'm paraphrasing my life, but I found myself owning a brand called New Zealand Natural, which I still think is the best brand for any New Zealand foods company. It says it all. And it was a brand that I was proud enough to wear on my back. So I would wear a t-shirt just like Stephen Tyndall that said, and if I still own the business, I would be wearing it today. But I've never worn my New Zealand Natural t-shirt since the day I sold it, because it feels like I would be stealing somebody else's brand. But the thing about brand is it was mine. I loved it. I lived it. I was proud to wear it. So when you're creating a brand, think about that, because you'll only be successful if you love it, if it feels right. And that's where intuition comes in. Because if you've got that little bit of intuition in your heart and your head, which we all have, you know if it feels right. I'm working on creating a new brand at the moment. And we've been in development. I hate words like that, because let's face it, what we've been doing is talking about it. There's no development. I was with a marketing company the other day, and they said, well, we need to socialise that idea. And I said, what bullshit is that? What does socialise mean? Come on. What are we doing? What you're really saying is we need to talk about it. And we've been through so many iterations of what does our next brand look like and feel like. And just on Monday, we received quotes from 3 branding companies, and they were about $150,000 each. And we were just looking at these going, oh, God, that's so much money. And then out of nowhere, one of the other people that's involved with me flicked up something on his iPad, and he said, have you seen this? And it was a photo of one of our shareholders doing what he does best. And we went, that's it. That's our imagery. That's our brand. Didn't cost $150,000. It was looking at someone's website, but we all felt it. We all felt, yeah, that's right. And that's what branding and that's what marketing's about. It's about feeling it deeply in your soul. And don't be sort of put off if you feel it and somebody else doesn't, because you just got to, if it's your business, you've got to fight for it. You've got to go, yep, it's me and it's my brand, and I feel proud of it. So here I ended up with ice cream, with what I think, the world's greatest food brand, the best people. What am I going to do with it? Well, New Zealand was great and it was doing quite nicely, thank you. But we decided, because Diane Foreman had this ego that said she wanted to walk down the street and see it, that we needed to take that brand. So how did we market it, and how did we end up with stores in 35 countries? This is how we did it. We socialised it to our friends. We faked it till we made it, because there's a huge amount of that. There's a huge amount of saying that you're bigger than you are. Nobody wants to hear. Look, I'll give you an example from lunch today. I was mentoring a young woman. I turned up at lunch. I said, "How are you?" And she said, "Oh, I'm really tired. I'm exhausted. It's the end of the year. It's terrible." And I thought, I've just given 2 hours of my life. I'm going to give 2 hours of my life to you, and you're too tired to open your eyes and look at me? You're never going to succeed because you've got to give your brand energy and passion, and you're the only person that can do it because it's yours. It's like your child, and if you don't feel like your brand is like your child, throw it away. Don't do it. Do something that feels right. So I had all these things going for me, and a lot of things going against us, like dairy prices and everything else you could imagine. But we decided that we needed to enter this great big new world called social media. We knew nothing about social media, absolutely nothing. But I went to a conference in Berlin, heard about this wonderful new medium, decided we had to have a social media department. So I came back, told my team, hire me a social media department. They went, "What's social media?" I said, "I don't know, but we'll find out. Just get me people that can do it." So all of a sudden there was a corridor filled with people doing social media. And then I thought, I'm not selling any more ice cream and I'm not growing my brand. What's social media doing about it? So you will never find me on LinkedIn. I don't use Facebook. I don't understand the medium. It's all too hard for me. But I know if you want to build a brand, you've got to have people that understand it. So I asked one of my children to show me what we were doing on social media because I didn't know how to access it. And they showed me that this social media department of mine had put up a post that day with ice cream and apple pie. And they went, "On a cold day, I eat apple pie." And I went, how is that branding? How is that marketing? So I'm on the phone at 10 o'clock at night screaming at my CEO, what are your social media people doing? They could have at least said something like, "With apple pie, I like New Zealand natural ice cream. Send us in your favourite flavours or your favourite recipes for pie and we'll send you a voucher for ice cream." Nobody in my social media department had thought of that. So we fired them all the next day. Thought, okay, that was a good experiment. You're gone. Well, what did Donald Trump say? You're fired. So they went. And I was sitting at home talking to my then 16-year-old daughter about this is all terrible. And she said, "Mum, what you need is you need a young person. You need somebody that understands the medium, not someone you're paying $200,000 a year to." So she told me about a guy that had gone to university with my son who had just started this tiny little social media company. She said, "Go and talk to Alex." So I did. And Alex took on running our social media. And guess what? Our local sales went up 20% in the first 6 months. Because he understood the medium. We didn't, but what we understood was that we needed to employ people that did. So the learning for me out of that was, if you can't do it, make sure you employ somebody who can. Contract it out is always a good thing, because if it doesn't work, you don't have to go through what we all know is a really hard process of moving people out of your life. So if you want to be a successful business brand, go social, understand it, but get people, not of my age group. You don't need a 25-year-old anymore. You need a 16-year-old. Because, Snapchat's gone. It's something else. I don't even know the words. But whatever it is, it's moved on to something new. So if you're going to make sure that you connect with a market, make sure you've got people of the age group of the market that you're going to connect with. So I go social or perish, because there's nothing else. When I started doing things like this, we were buying advertising campaigns on TV. You'd never do that now. So understand social media, love your brand, love your people, and be passionate. Never turn up too tired or exhausted for a meeting. If you are, cancel the meeting. Make sure that every day you bring the best you can be to that meeting. You're much better to ring up and say, "I've got a migraine, I'll see you next week," and go to sleep, because you can't have an off day when you're building a brand. And you've got to be prepared when you want to take something like we did from a little country like New Zealand to the rest of the world. It doesn't come easily. It's a lot of sleeping on planes. It's a lot of 3 a.m.s in airports, and you've got to really deeply want it. And if you don't do it, because it doesn't matter. You can still have a great life. It's only for idiots like me that get a thrill out of walking down the street and seeing that brand. Last week I was in Fiji speaking at a conference, and there was a New Zealand natural store in the conference facility. It's a really weird feeling to be in another country, seeing a brand that I used to love, seeing somebody wearing a t-shirt that I had designed, knowing it wasn't mine. It kind of gets you in your heart. So I found by the end of the conference I couldn't walk past it anymore. I had to take a detour to avoid it. And that's not because I don't think it's the world's greatest brand. And somebody paid me a phenomenal amount of money to own that brand, but it's not mine anymore. And my job now is to go on and create the next one. What it's going to be, I don't know. But I know that we will be socially very, very, very conscious of what other people think about us, because the bigger you get, the higher you fall. So we don't want to put the Diane Foreman or the Emerald brand next to something that's going to fail. So we're taking much less risk. But what we're going to do is we will grow another global brand. We will grow it from New Zealand, and we will make a success of it because we're passionate. And again, please, I can't talk to you a lot about marketing. I don't know. I know how to hire good marketing people. And just an aside, when you're hiring people, I'm going to tell you to do something that people think is really crazy. Do a drive-by. That's the craziest thing you've ever heard of. Never hire somebody in a role that matters if you don't drive by their house, because how they keep their house, which is their biggest asset, is how they're going to keep your business or your brand. So if I'm hiring anybody in a senior role, I'm driving past their house. I'm seeing how they live. And it's not, people say to me, well, that makes you the home and garden police. It's not about that. I would be really worried if I was putting somebody in a $100,000 a year role and they lived in a fabulous house with a Rolls Royce parked out the front. That would tell me as much as if I was putting somebody in a $300,000 a year role and they lived in a really terrible house with grass up to its windowsills. Because, both of them are telling you a story about the person. The person with the overly ostentatious house, how did they get it? Whose pocket did they have their hand in? The person that's living in a tip, if they don't care how they live, how are they going to care about my brand? So, that's kind of one of my big tips in life. Always, always do the drive-by. And I talked about this at a conference recently, and somebody stood up and said, I'm an undertaker, and we do exactly what you're talking about. And I went, what? And they said, when somebody comes for a job for us as an undertaker, he said, when I'm interviewing, I get my wife to run outside and have a look what their car's like. Because if their car's not spotless, they're not going to keep my hearse spotless, and my customers aren't going to want grandma going to the crematorium in a dirty hearse. So it's all about understanding the little tiny things in life that give your business the edge. So I probably haven't talked very much about marketing. Really happy to take questions and be more specific, but I hope I've given you a kind of a basic of how I got to be here and how I got to grow some really interesting businesses. Thank you.
Right on. Well, the questions coming through, you certainly have covered a lot on marketing. But a couple of things. You shared with me a story before this evening about expensive slippers for homeware, with the insight around a target market of one.
One of the most important things in marketing is to ensure that you are not a target market of one. I can tell you a great story about this. I saw these amazing velvet house shoes. They had a fleur-de-lis on the front. They were really sexy, and I just imagined myself giving these wonderful 1980s dinner parties, flirting down the stairs in my beautiful clothes with my velvet shoes. So I decided I was going to buy the business because I couldn't believe that every woman in the world wasn't like me. But of course, the problem was that these shoes were retailing at $350 a pair. Very few women were going to buy a pair of these slippers. And then the problem, of course, was, where on earth can you wear them? You're never going to wear them out. So if you've bought a pair, you spent your $350, and I'm still wearing my prototypes 20 years later. So it was a really big mistake for me because I saw me, Diane Foreman, as a target market of one. So I was sat down by a friend who was an advertising agent, and I was full of woe. And he said, Diane, always think, who is your market? You're not your market. Go for a product that everybody's going to buy. Go for a product that there's a huge market for. And particularly if you want to be a worldwide business, something that they're going to, there's no point in trying to sell power fritters in downtown Las Vegas because you ain't going to get good power. So make sure that your market and your product is going to be available and wanted by your audience. So that's where the never be a target market of one comes from.
Fantastic. One of the things that you talk quite openly about is that entrepreneurs are born and they're not made, which for a number of parents in the room will be thinking, but I want little Johnny to grow up to become an entrepreneur. Can you just unpack what you mean by that?
Sure. Look, I think entrepreneurs, it's something inside you. It's about an attitude to risk. We have a mutual friend we discovered in our conversation. This mutual friend worked for me for 20 years. He's, I think, a world-class CEO. I'd be happy to take him to, and I think you would back me up on this, I would take him to talk to a group of professionals in any country in the world and be really proud. Why did he work for me? Why is he still working in a business that I used to own? And why isn't he doing it for himself? It's not because he's not bright, because he's ferociously intelligent. It's not because he's not personable, because he's incredibly personable. But what he is, he's risk averse. And he doesn't want to risk his reputation, his ego, and his money. So he's prepared to work for someone else. And I think that's the difference between entrepreneurs and business people. An entrepreneur has a different attitude to risk, and I don't think you can educate that into somebody. I think that comes from within. So that's why I say entrepreneurs are born, not made.
So did you pick at an early age when you were selling eggs and making money off your mates? Did you know that was the start of a career, or was that just something you enjoyed?
I always wanted, remember, I came from a really, really poor family. You've got no idea how poor the family was that I came from. And I used to watch people playing tennis. And I can remember thinking, wow, if you were really rich, you could play tennis? And so, because tennis lessons or a tennis racket or any of those things were so far from my world. And so I used to think, the only thing I did think was, if I sold enough eggs, maybe one day I could play tennis. So, maybe I wasn't seeing myself as an entrepreneur, but I certainly knew that if I got the sales, I could get the next thing.
Fantastic. One of the questions that's come through is the adoration by which you refer to Bill.
Yes.
For those that don't have a Bill and don't necessarily have an immediate mentor to learn from, what would your advice be to them?
Get a mentor. I think mentors are the most powerful thing in any business. People are often scared to get one, but you need to get one. But when you get one, listen to what they say. Because I've written a book and I published it last year, and in the book I talk about how much mentors matter. The unfortunate thing is that I've mentored 38 people since the book came out, and the reason I've stopped doing it is because I tell them what I think, and then they go and do what they were doing before anyway. So if you want a mentor, I'm not saying we're all right or wrong, but I'm saying maybe just try and listen to what they say. So for me, go and approach the person that's the best in your industry. If you want to make ice cream, think, who makes the best ice cream? Who's got the best experience in ice cream? And go and ask that person to be their mentor, your mentor. If they won't, ask them who they would recommend. But, as I say, I was so lucky to have Bill. But one of the other things Bill gave me was entree to New Zealand business at a very, very high level. And from that, I became a member of the New Zealand Business Roundtable. It's now a defunct organisation. But over the time I was there, it had 50 members, 49 men and me. And so I had, again, unrestricted access to people that I could call up. And there's all sorts of highfalutin lines about what the Business Roundtable was. But really what it was a union for the bosses. So, if I had a business problem, I could ring Douglas Myers, whose name probably doesn't mean anything to a young audience, or I could ring Alan Gibbs or any of these stars and ask them for advice. And so if you don't have a Bill and you don't have a business roundtable, you do have a phone and you do have LinkedIn, less you me because I'm not on it. Email these people, ask them questions. People, especially in a country like New Zealand, people are always willing to help. and always want to share, you'll find someone.
Well, let's just unpack that a little bit further, if you don't mind. So, let's say someone has this person in sight. I mean, I'm sure you've been approached the right way and the wrong way. So, what's the right way to approach a mentor to say, "Can I go on a journey?"
Okay, the wrong way is to come up to them at a social event and stick a business card under their nose and say, "Here's my business card. Will you be my mentor?" Totally the wrong way. The right way is to do some stalking, find out about that person, send them an email, not a demanding one. You know, I've had people say to me, "I deserve you to be my mentor." No, actually you don't. Or "You owe me." I owe you nothing. But it's how you ask. You know, "Dear Diane, you know, I really enjoyed your..." That's another thing. I wrote a book, and people then would write to me and say, "I want you to be my mentor." So you'd write back and say, "Well, look, have you read my book? Is there anything in particular I could help with?" And they'd come back and say, "No, I haven't read your book." Well, really? It's $39.99 at Whitcoulls, and the money's going to charity. You know, go read my book, and then come back and ask me. It's nothing more flattering than someone that would write to me and say, "Diane, I read your book. I really like what you said in chapter 46. I think you could help me with my business. Can we have a coffee?" Really hard to say no to that, and you'll find that most people can't.
Do you see that often? Are we as New Zealanders, are we getting better at that sort of thing?
I think it's 50-50. I think some people have an innate charm, which are now allowed, and you need an innate charm. Being successful as a marketer or a business person is about being able to be charming. No one's going to be successful if they just rock up and say, "Yeah, g'day, I want you to buy my..." It's not about that. So it's about learning some manners. And, you know, life is about good manners, and good business is about good manners.
One of the questions picks on the fact that you mentioned that you didn't go through traditional higher education, universities and so forth. Have you since done that?
No.
How important is it, do you think, to be a successful entrepreneur?
Okay, well, I got into trouble a few weeks ago with this question, so I'm going to try and unpack it in a better way. I believe that it's really important to grow business people, and it's really important that people don't just send their kids into the professions. However, in the year 2016, there's not a lot of people that can do what I did without education. So what I say is, go to university, get a degree, because a degree teaches you how to think. But once you've got that degree, don't go into the profession. And so, you know, I mean, that might sound quite contradictory, but I'm saying learn to think and then use it. Use it to grow a business, and then you can sell your product and eventually your business.
Fantastic. From the floor, any particular burning question?
Have I bored you all?
No,
Thank you. You know, there are days, it's quite an interesting experience, because all my life I've always felt that I was behind a glass and that everybody else were the cool kids, and the cool kids were having fun and they were growing great businesses and they had lots of friends, and I was not a cool kid. And I think the great thing about probably selling foods, my last business, was I funnily thought, I think I've done okay. You know, I've now sold 3 international businesses to global, much bigger companies. I must be all right. But, you know, I'm 56, and it took till I was 55 to feel I was doing okay. So thank you. That makes me feel good.
It's a lovely comment. What's your view on glass ceilings? Because it's a topic that's been debated a number of times in these sessions. Are they real? Do they get too much headspace? Should we just move off the topic?
There are. Look what's happened in America. I was looking at some of the stats as to why people didn't vote for Clinton. And people said, and this is a stat I was reading the other day, and I won't quote it because I can't quite remember, but there were so many men that just refused to vote for a woman. And, you know, I see that in the workplace all the time. I believe the glass ceiling still exists. I think equality has got a long way to go. And I think it's really, really tough to be a woman and try and crack that ceiling, because no matter how good you are, someone wants to knock you off your pedestal. And sometimes it's other women, because I often find that other women can be the harshest critics and the harshest push you down on the head than men. Because a lot of women think, I've worked really hard to get here, I've created this, I don't want another person, I don't want competition, we'll just keep that person down. So I call it the elbow block, that often women stick their elbows out and stop other women succeeding. So it's not just about men. It's about we all should want the best person for the job, whether it's male or female. And I think that that's the only sort of discrimination we should have. Who's the best person in the role? Not, is it a male or is it a female? And until we get businesses that only think about hiring the best, we're going to have discrimination.
What's your one trait, the one that's made you as incredibly successful as you are?
Probably determination. You know, when people say no, I go, well, okay, how am I going to make them say yes? So I think it's probably my determination that I hate failure. And so I'm likely to go back and try again. And I think, and I visualise, I often visualise what success is going to look like. So I think it's that determination to see that end goal.
And it's an interesting topic, isn't it? Because if entrepreneurship can't be taught, for the parents in the room, can determination, can grit be learned?
I think we are what we are, and we're all a combination. I mean, I look at my own family. I have 4 children. Obviously their father was a very successful entrepreneur. I'm a successful entrepreneur. None of my children have any entrepreneurial flair at all. I've got a school teacher, a psychologist, a nurse, and a daughter studying film. And so they have, and an exercise physiologist. And so none of them have any interest, and none of them really have the grit. It's really interesting. So genetically, you would have thought that they did, but they say, you guys work too hard. We actually want not to have the life that you had. And I go, well, you're just so jolly lucky that I did work that hard, because you now live on such a feather bed, you can judge me. And, and it's easy for them to judge me when they're lying on their feather bed, because, I bought, be honest, I bought all my children a house, a car, and they've all been educated to master's standard. And I thought that's the best gift that I can give my children. But, that's given them a huge head start to be in their 20s and 30s and be debt-free. So it's very easy for them not to have grit or determination, because how hard is it? So I've probably inadvertently given them such a feather bed that they can be critical of me. So I just say to you, you are what you are. You can't make it, you can't change it. It comes from inside.
That brings us to time. And so, Diane, I wanted to personally really thank you, because we've put on a number of these events and we have had some incredible speakers, but your story is not only unique, the empathy and the honesty by which you share it is incredible.
Thank you.
So on behalf of everyone in the room, please join me in passing our thanks.
Thank you.